Evening, everyone, and welcome to our virtual conversation, Flooding, Fact, Fiction, and FEMA. Thank you for joining us. I am Hank Hodde, the Sustainability and Resiliency Coordinator for Pinellas County. My job is to find ways that we as a community can withstand disaster and be prepared to rebuild our lives and adapt to changing conditions in the future. I will be your moderator for this event. I'm pleased to introduce the panelists for this evening: Lisa Foster, the Pinellas County Floodplain Manager; Jess McCracken, the Whole Community Specialist with Pinellas County Emergency Management; Joe Borries, the Operations Manager with Pinellas County Emergency Management. We've also asked local experts to be available if you have questions for them. A few housekeeping items before we begin tonight. This program is being recorded. The link will be made available to all attendees following the presentation, as well as posted on Pinellas County YouTube channel. During this program, your audio will be muted and your video will remain off, but we strongly encourage communication from every attendee. This can be done via the question and answer feature through the webinar presentation. There is a question and answer feature available, which will allow you to ask questions throughout the presentation. It is important to mention that the questions can only be seen by the panelists, unlike a chat feature in a normal Zoom webinar. We will answer as many of your questions as we can tonight and conduct any follow-ups as requested or needed. At the conclusion of the webinar, you will be directed to a brief survey giving you a chance to evaluate the presentation. Please take a few moments to complete the survey to provide our team with your valuable feedback to help us improve future events. Lastly, every attendee will be sent a follow-up email with links to all of the tools and resources discussed during the presentation, as well as the contact information for all of the panelists. So to start, as you know, many residents along the beaches or low-lying areas and mobile parks in Pinellas County were impacted by Tropical Storm Eta, which came through Pinellas County on November 12th, causing extensive flooding from rain and storm surge. They now face issues with insurance, homes that are uninhabitable, and questions about disaster assistance. In fact, we've heard at town hall meeting last week that residents are dealing with housing displacement issues, misinformation, and fraudulent contractors. We are not new to our hazards and work every day to ensure that we are more resilient in the face of this type of adversity. In fact, we know that over a quarter of the county is in a high-risk flood zone. There are 126,000 flood insurance policies countywide, making us number 5 in the state. We have over 1,500 repetitive flood loss properties, and roughly 65% of the population lives in an evacuation zone. The goal of this webinar is to address the types of flooding risks in Pinellas County, the role of local governments in disasters, which assistance is not available from FEMA in every disaster, available insurance policies and the coverage differences between insurance policies, tips for navigating the insurance claims process, as well as address the questions from our residents affected by Tropical Storm Eta. Dealing with loss can be the most devastating experience you face as a property owner. Combined with the restrictions and guidelines in place with COVID-19, navigating recovery efforts present more issues and greater challenges with other recovery efforts. We can't solve every issue, but we are working hard to find some solutions for you and the overall community. We hope by helping you understand the issues and challenges faced when dealing with the disaster, offering helpful resources and contacts, and addressing the questions you have, we are able to offer you not only support, but guidance as you take the next steps towards recovery. Now, I would like to ask our speakers to introduce themselves. Remember, you can enter questions at any time, and if you have any questions following the webinar, you can email us at ema@pinellascounty.org. That's ema@pinellascounty.org. Now I'd like to introduce our floodplain manager, Ms. Lisa Foster.
Thank you, Hank, and thank you all for joining us today. Floodplain management here in Pinellas County starts with understanding the risk of flooding and using that information to design policies and plans that will help protect people and property from flooding to the extent possible. Things like building codes, maintenance of stormwater systems, flood mitigation plans, capital projects to address flooding, education and outreach. These are some of the things that the county and the cities implement to help protect you from flooding. In addition to federal, state, local floodplain policies and preventative measures, though, each of us here has a personal responsibility to understand our risk and be prepared for the potential flooding that can occur here. I mean, we are in Pinellas County, Florida. We're a peninsula on a peninsula in a subtropical climate. Some of us are actually on a barrier island to the peninsula, on the peninsula in the subtropical climate. So the flood risk here is real, and every single one of us here in Pinellas County is in a flood zone. That flood zone may be high, moderate, or low risk, but everybody's in a flood zone. And you need to understand what that flood zone is and what it means. It's also important to remember that hurricane evacuation zones and flood zones are completely different. They're two completely different zones. Your flood zones are found on your FEMA flood insurance rate map, and they are based on a probability storm event, a 100-year event you've probably heard. Our storm surge models are what drive the evacuation zones, and those are based on a category 1, 2, 3, etc. hurricane. So those two zones are different, and it's really important that you know both. We have many different types of flooding here in Pinellas County. We get the heavy rainfall, the prolonged rain that can cause flooding along our creeks and our ponds. Then we get these really intense rainfall events that cause the flashy flooding in the street, the localized flooding. And then we also get these blue sky flooding events along the coast from king tides. This is a newer phenomenon that we're seeing. It's worse down in South Florida, but it's here now. And then, of course, we also see flooding from storm surge. And Tropical Storm Eta caused significant flooding from storm surge on our barrier island communities and areas along the intercoastal and Tampa Bay. Heavy rainfall caused localized flooding further inland, too. Eta brushed by us, and it pushed water up into the intercoastal waterway and into the bays, and that water had nowhere to go. So it pushed over the land and into the roads and into the cars and into the homes that were low-lying. Fortunately, we just nourished our beaches, so our dunes and the nourished beachside properties were protected from that. We lost a lot of sand that had been recently nourished, though. I want to note here, and this is really important, this was a small storm. We regulate development to protect from much larger storms than what we just saw. Unfortunately, a lot of the county was built, though, before we had these flood maps or really understood what the flood risk was. So we have a lot of buildings that are quite frankly just built too low. Some of the buildings that were low were so badly damaged that they're no longer safe to be in. There are some mold issues, then structural issues as well that we've seen. So some of these buildings are going to need to come down and be rebuilt, elevated, so that they are protected when they're rebuilt from flooding. You know, living in Pinellas County, we need to have a plan in place, and we need to stay informed, and we need to stay safe and recover from storms of all different intensities. Because the county and its municipalities participate in the National Flood Insurance Program, though, flood insurance is available to you. All property owners and renters here have that at their disposal. The county and most of the municipalities also participate in what's called the Community Rating System. That CRS program provides a discount on your flood policy because we have proactive floodplain management programs. So you could get up to a 25% discount on your flood insurance, you know, just because we are proactive. So this saves the county $25 million per year. I mean, this is your savings across the county for these programs that we participate in, because we have these proactive plans and policies in place. It's really important that you understand what flood insurance covers. Homeowners insurance usually doesn't cover flooding. Renters insurance doesn't usually cover flooding. With your flood policy, it comes building as one piece and contents as another piece. So you really need to understand how that flood insurance policy works, what's covered, what's not covered. As many of you have recently learned, loss of use is not covered. You know, we're here to hopefully answer some of those questions for you tonight that you have about your flood risk, about insurance, about how to get back up on your feet and try to connect you with resources to help you. I'm going to pass it over to Jess now with emergency management. She's going to elaborate a little bit more on the topic of flood insurance, and I look forward to answering your questions. Thank you.
Thank you, Lisa, and thank you everyone for joining us this evening. My name is Jess McCracken, and I'm the whole community specialist with Pinellas County Emergency Management. My role with emergency management is to coordinate outreach efforts that bring disaster preparedness education and resources to the residents of Pinellas County. especially those that are more vulnerable populations. So I've been asked to speak this evening about everyone's favorite topic, and that's insurance. In my previous life, I was an independent insurance consultant and worked with individuals, businesses, and associations, guiding them through the insurance process. As you can imagine, the conversation with a homeowner when you're talking about insurance is very different than the conversation, say, with a board of directors for a condominium association or a high-rise building. And that has to do with the exposures that are associated with their property or their buildings. So you need to secure insurance to protect against the things that you are exposed to, the things that your property is exposed to. What was similar across the board, no matter who I was working with, homeowner or board of director, are the key points to approaching the insurance process. And that is knowing and understanding three things: your exposure. So what are the exposures to your property? What is your property vulnerable to? Not only does that help guide you to what type of insurance to look into getting, but also some possible mitigation things that you can do prior to the storm approaching that may reduce the damage to your home. You also need to know and understand your options. Work with your insurance agent to explore the options available to you once you know your risks and you know what your home's exposures are. Ask for every deductible option. Figure out what discounts are available to you or what quick fixes can be made to possibly apply a discount. A lot of homeowners companies do also offer flood insurance. It's still an NFIP separate policy, but that is a multi-policy discount. So little things like that can save you some premium. And finally, knowing and understanding your coverage. Believe me, I understand. Insurance is sometimes like reading something in a different language, and it can be difficult to understand. But the key thing here is to educate yourself and to understand what your policy includes, but most importantly, what your policy excludes. For example, as Lisa mentioned, most homeowners policies typically do not cover flood or damages from flood. This is obtained through a separate policy. So when determining coverage or which policy responds, it's actually what caused the damage that matters. Flood insurance covers losses directly caused by flooding. In simple terms, a flood is rising or sweeping waters from an exterior source in an excess of water on land that's normally dry. And this is affecting 2 or more acres of land or 2 or more properties. 90% of all natural disasters involve flooding, and flood damage can strike in low or moderate risk areas. So being in Florida and being in Pinellas County, one of the most common things I heard is, I don't need flood insurance, I'm not in a flood zone. Well, as Lisa mentioned, everyone is in a flood zone. You're either in a low, moderate, or high risk area. 20% of all flood claims are filed from homeowners in moderate flood risk areas. So you should know how to prepare for the possibility of a flood. And you can get the same coverage that somebody in a high risk area could secure, and it's a fraction of the premium. So as emergency managers, we always are urging everyone to make a plan and have a disaster plan in place for your family, your business, to know what to do. Insurance is very much and should be a part of your plan, because although we can't stop the storm from coming, we can put the right coverages in place to help us repair those damages and possibly rebuild our home if it gets to that intensity. A couple quick things to note: there are standard 30-day wait periods on flood policies unless it is associated with a mortgage closing. So don't wait until the storm is on the grid. Most carriers will shut down if there's a storm on the grid, even if it's not in the state that you're living in, because a lot of carriers write across the country. So they will shut down writing new business, and you can't get the flood coverage. So you wouldn't be covered, even if you paid your premium, you wouldn't be covered for that storm. So that's important to know. Also, they're very easy to purchase, and there's over 100 companies that write flood insurance. Again, there are some private flood insurers that will write excess insurance. If your home is over the value that's offered through NFIP, which is $250,000 on your building, you could secure an excess flood policy to cover the difference in the value. And a lot of those policies come with the additional or loss of use. So if you were to have to stay in a hotel or rent a car or something along those lines, you may have the option of that coverage. But these are all things that you should talk to your insurance professional about. They're knowledgeable. They know what companies offer what, and really explore your options.
Thanks, Jess. And now we'll hear from Joe.
Unmute. Hi, Joe Borries here from Pinellas County Emergency Management. And thank you all for joining us tonight for this very important topic. And I'm sorry for those who have been impacted by Tropical Storm Eta. Emergency management, here we try to coordinate the orchestra, the response to a disaster. We try to help the community plan and prepare. Then we try to provide that warning and notification when a storm is coming. And then post-event, we're looking at the recovery activities and making sure that we get all our partners to come to the table with resources. And that's what we're here to talk about tonight. So following Tropical Storm Eta, all your municipal partners and the county damage inspectors went out and canvassed all across the county looking for damages. Now it's flooding, right? So it happened during the evening and then disappeared with the low tide by the morning. So they're going out and doing a windshield assessment and looking for the water lines and where the water was from anecdotal information. And they did a pretty good job. They found, I want to say 80% of it at the first blush going through. And then we take that information and we provide it up to the state to show them the impacts that we have and what resources that we can share together. They came back and asked for some further questions. And we provided that back to them. We got some insurance information. We got some more photographic information for them. What's different in today's environment, with COVID is they would have came down and we would have did this together as a team and gone out and looked at these communities from Shore Acres, Twin City Mobile Home Park, Madera Beach, these heavily impacted communities. But that's just not possible today. So we went back out to the community and we've asked for further photographic evidence and actually some newsreels we got from the local TV stations has been helpful as well too. We're putting all that together and we're submitting that up to the state. Then the state will take that information and write it up and submit it to the federal partners, where everybody says Fema up there, and ask for assistance. Unfortunately, the damages weren't that great. An emergency declaration for public assistance takes at least $3.6 million in damages to the locals and at least $29 million to the state. And that just didn't happen with Tropical Storm Eta, unfortunately. And then the thing that we're talking about today is the residential damages. So that's where we went out and inspected and we're providing that up there. We're fortunate. We didn't have any destroyed homes, but we did have homes with very substantial damages. And if I had 3 inches of water in my house, I would say that's pretty bad and that's destroyed. But there's unfortunately criteria that the federal government uses of what constitutes severe damages or not. So we've categorized those damages. We're making our case before the state. You may have heard that there was a federal declaration, and there was for what's called category A and B. So that's debris clearance and for protective measures. And unfortunately, the only thing that they granted us was for mass care and sheltering. So we're able to submit for reimbursement for those, but the rest of the program within those categories, we had to make sure that we met our thresholds, and we just haven't done that as a community because we just didn't have that many damages. And I know that I'm saying that to people who have great damages in their homes, but collectively, unfortunately, we didn't rise up to that level. So we're not out of the woods yet. We're not out of the game yet. We're still submitting to, again, to the state, who submit to FEMA, and we're going to ask for everything that we can get from them. We expect to have that completed, our third submittal this week to them, and then hopefully they'll have an answer within a week or two for us of what type of assistance that we can receive. We also have our Unmet Needs Committee that's working and trying to compile the information too, and working with the national VOADs and the local VOADs, the volunteers, organizations active in disasters, and seeking assistance for them as well for our residents. So all that is going on and has been going on since Tropical Storm Eta left. I know it's taking some time, but we're working through all that, trying to get the information and make a compelling case on behalf of Pinellas County residents to get all the resources that are available. So I look forward to answering your questions later.
Thanks, Joe, and everyone for providing that overview. We have a few questions that we're going to kick this off with in discussion. I have some myself for the panelists to loop back on some of their comments. I do want to mention, if you're attending tonight and you received damage from the storm, and if you have not yet filled out our online survey so we can compile that data, you can find it at pinellascounty.org on the main website under special interests. In the middle of the page, you'll see a highlighted area for the online survey tool. So really, to get right into it, Joe, I'm going to follow up on just what you mentioned at the end of your talk there on recovery groups and resources that are available. So, in lieu of, FEMA not being here yet, or we don't know if they're going to come, what resources are available or are we thinking about for residents?
Well, residents are always available to call 211 to start there. That's our everyday blue sky organization that has funding available from different avenues that they could start with first. They can always call the American Red Cross as well too, their national hotline, and we'll provide that later, and ask them for assistance as well too. And we know that Bay Area Legal Services, for those who are income qualified, can also call that organization as well too. So if you're a renter or homeowner trying to navigate the insurance or other issues with your rent lease, something like that, and they're available as well too.
Great, thanks. And we do have representatives from the Red Cross and Bay Area Legal Services on tonight. And to get at the first question from our attendees, Joe, you mentioned that they are supposed to come down and do a damage assessment with county officials. Who is they? What's that process, and why hasn't FEMA stepped in yet? Can you just simplify that real quick?
Well, the state has been in constant contact with FEMA, so we've been back and forth. And we shouldn't forget our businesses either, Hank. There's a business damage assessment website as well, too. Right. So the State Recovery Bureau has been in constant contact with FEMA, and that's the DHS, Department of Homeland Security, and FEMA specifically, Region 4, and in talking about our damages here, and those were some of those questions came back. And we need to, as a county, provide that up to the state. And they've asked us again for those questions that we provided back from our damages, our residential damages. And we submit that to the state. And then they'll, on our behalf, the county's behalf, work with FEMA Region 4, who then works with national FEMA and would eventually reach the president's desk, for any type of declaration, okay, for the emergency or catastrophic. The SBA process is separate. They'll take that to the Small Business Administration and submit that to them for their emergency declaration that we hope to get and make the case for.
Great. And the state is Florida Department of Emergency Management. That's where the Recovery Bureau is?
Management, right. Yes, sir.
Okay, great. Okay, great. So, the next question that we have, I'm going to, everybody's been wondering this, and this is for Lisa. When will the new flood maps be in effect? And maybe, before that, I want to have you clarify a little bit on, what is the difference between a 100-year versus a 500-year or a low, moderate, and high risk flood zone that Jess mentioned. Can you clarify that and then talk about the new maps? You're on mute. You're on mute.
Sorry about that. It's not a meeting without somebody on mute. So the low, moderate, and high risk flood zones are based on what level of flooding you can expect. So we talk about the 100-year storm, and what does that really even mean? Does it mean it's going to flood once in 100 years? No, absolutely not. It means there's a 1% chance every single year that that particular flood that is shown on the map could happen. And the 500-year, it's the same thing. It's a probability that that storm could happen. Harvey in Texas, for example, was something like a 500-year event. Eta that just went by was less than a 25-year event. So it was a very small event in the big scheme of things. So your shaded X zones on your FEMA flood insurance rate maps are your moderate risk. Those are your 500-year floodplains. When you look at those flood insurance rate maps and you see those shaded blue areas, those are all considered special flood hazard area. They're your 100-year floodplains. Those are the ones that we are regulating to with your building elevations. Everything that is not shaded at all on those maps is considered low risk. Doesn't mean there's no risk, it just means it's low risk. And remember, those maps are different from the evacuation zone maps, right? So these are your probability-based flood maps. It's the probability that that certain flood might happen. And every many years, FEMA will go back and update those maps. And we went through a flood map update process, which started back in 2012. So the data on the maps that's not yet effective is only as good as the data that was available back in 2012. I just want to put that out there because we've also got a vulnerability assessment that was recently completed, which were developed with more recent data and more reflective of current conditions than the FEMA maps that aren't even effective yet. So we had some comments and some appeals that we submitted back to FEMA, and they have resolved those, and they are working on the final quality review of the map package for us now. It's a flood insurance study along with the flood insurance rate map. They will issue letters of final determination called LFDs. I expect them sometime in the spring, but the timeline has been changing through the whole process. You know, as things arise like storms or COVID or whatever else might pull FEMA resources away. So it's been a long process, but we do expect to get those letter of final determination sometime in the spring. There's a 6-month period for all the municipalities to update their floodplain ordinances. After that 6-month period, those maps will go effective. So the regulations are still going to be to the current effective map unless it's higher on the preliminary, in which case we will be advising the higher build because those new maps, we expect them to go to effective at the end of 21. That answer that question?
Yeah, and just to confirm the 100-year, the special flood hazard area or the high risk area, it requires insurance if you have a mortgage, right? And you know, what happens if you're in the X or non-X and then you're put it into, you know, the 100-year, do you, in the new map, do you have to go get insurance, and you know, how long do you have?
Sure. So if you are in a case where you're currently in one of those X zones, so you're either in a low or a moderate risk area, and the new map has you going into that special flood hazard area. Maybe you're up along Upper Tampa Bay. We had an area up there that we have several properties that are going into the special flood hazard area. You want to secure your policy so that you can get that newly mapped process underway so that you can keep your existing preferred risk rate for that first year, and then you'll be on a glide path up to the actuary rate, which will be grandfathered to your X zone policy, if that makes sense to do that. If you're only a little bit below the base flood elevation, though, it may make sense for you to get an elevation certificate and have that policy checked, because an actuary policy could potentially be less expensive than the actuary rate that you'll eventually get to, but you won't need to do that immediately. What you do want to do is talk to your flood insurance agent as soon as possible so that you can get a policy in place on that preferred risk rate, and then you'll get that glide path in.
Great. And Jess, yes.
Lisa, so, we're talking flood insurance, and what we're seeing is people went out and they got their flood insurance, but now they can't be in their home. I think there's a rider or something they need to do for loss of use.
So the NFIP flood insurance policies do not cover loss of use. As Jess mentioned, you can go to the private industry and purchase additional flood insurance on top of that NFIP policy, but the NFIP policy itself does not cover loss of use. Now, normally we see these storms associated with wind damage, and when your wind policy kicks in, that's where the loss of use comes into play. Now, this was a flood event, not a wind event, so we didn't have anybody's homes destroyed by wind where that loss of use from that other different policy would kick in. Generally we would see those in tandem with each other, right? Wind and flood damage. But because this was a small storm, we just saw the flood damage, a half a foot of water on homes, which is, it's a big mess. It's a really big mess. I'm not downplaying the damage that was done. I mean, you're out of your house, you're having drywall removed. It's definitely a big deal. But in the grand scheme of things, this was a small storm.
Right.
To piggyback on what Lisa was talking about, in the situation like that, where we're talking about hurricane coming through, being declared hurricane status, you may be actually dealing with two adjusters on two policies and two claims process when you're talking about flooding in your house and you've had wind damage to your roof. So this, like Lisa said, wasn't a wind event, it was a rain event. So the homeowner's policy that normally covers that loss of use or the additional living expenses doesn't come into play because flood insurance specifically excludes that. That's why it's very important to know what the exclusions are and maybe look to fill those gaps in.
Okay, great, thanks. So one of the next questions that we have is, if there's a total loss, what are the options? What does that process look like? And having a declared total loss, either determined as substantial damage from the city or from the insurance company.
So if you have a home that's been determined to be substantially damaged, that means it's going to cost more than 50% of the value of that structure to repair it to the condition it was in prior to it flooding. And those homes are usually not even safe to be in, and they need to come down. We want to prioritize the welfare of the people, though. So, folks, if you're in one of those homes that was substantially damaged, you really need to find yourself a safe place to live, and then we'll work towards those demo permits to take those homes down because they're unsafe to be in. But we'll do this one step at a time. You need to contact your building department and get those demo permits underway, or at least your plan to have the demo permit. You need to communicate with your building department about what your plan is going to be. We're not going out and putting red tags on anybody and condemning them unless they are really, really unsafe structures. They will need to come down, and you need to be in contact with the building department just so that they know what your plan is. But first and foremost, get yourself someplace safe to live right now.
Great. And Joe, moving forward, we have a few questions on, if what do they do if there's substantial damage, if the home's a loss, there's other homes that are at a loss around them. We have some homes that need to be lifted due to code, but we don't have FEMA assistance right now, or they may not have insurance. So can you talk a little bit more about SBA and how residents can utilize that disaster loan if we get it to do any necessary repairs or upgrades or elevating or mitigating?
Sure. So if we qualify for the Small Business Administration, so you can get a personal loan as a private property owner up for a certain amount of money for the repairs that you need. I think Lisa could speak, Jessica could speak to this. I think after a certain amount, there might be some insurance requirements to come in with that as well too, depending on what you borrow, because your collateral is going to most likely be your home. So those are, again, low interest loans based on some income as well too, criteria that they're going to go through with you. So they're going to have case management with you and work through your personal situation because everybody will be slightly different.
Okay.
And I know that there is, there's been bantering around about a program where some of that they could mitigate, get further loans if they wanted to mitigate and make their home stronger.
So there's a flood mitigation assistance program through FEMA, but that needs to go through the jurisdiction where the property is. It's already closed for this year, and that's more of a pre-mitigation thing rather than a recovery program. The timing of it wouldn't work out with somebody that needs to get their home brought up to compliance now, because they would have to wait until the next notice of funding comes out sometime next year, and then it's a long process to get those applications in. If they have an NFIP policy, though, there's something called increased costs of compliance, ICC, and that clause is up to an additional $30,000 that's available on top of whatever the policy was taken out for if you are substantially damaged. And that's just to give you a little boost in bringing it into compliance. And whether that's via elevation and repairing or a demo rebuild, you would be eligible with the letter from the floodplain manager from your jurisdiction that says that you are substantially damaged. You would give that letter to your flood insurance agent.
Great. Yeah, and looking at the SBA website, so homeowners may apply for up to $200,000 to repair or replace their primary residence. Renters and homeowners may borrow up to $40,000 to replace or repair personal property like clothing, furniture, cars, appliances, anything damaged or destroyed in the disaster. You can be eligible for up to 20% of a loan increase above the real estate damage verified by SBA for improvements that will help prevent risk of future property damage. So you're not just, doing same for same or mitigating to where you are, but you're preventing future damage as well. And if you're in a situation where you need to lift your home and become, compliant, you're going to be preventing future damage. So that may be an option for you. This is kind of like if you were to have a homeowner's claim, it could be a fire or a tree or a wind. There's something called ordinance and law. And if you have that endorsement, you get additional money on top of your insurance claim to build to code. And so that's what this additional funding with SBA can do for you. Because sometimes, the loan that's approved may be a little tight, to your specific needs. Jess, I wanted to hit on something real quick that you said, and maybe then Lisa can chime in with a tool or resource. How do I know what risks? I mean, we just had Eta, right? So we know that we received flooding, but even for going into the future, and we're talking about mitigating homes now for the future, how do I know what risks my property are exposed to so I can get the right insurance?
That's a great question. Your insurance agent, and I would suggest talking to several insurance agents to kind of bid out your insurance, but also get the information. They're very educated about what flood zone you're in. They can pull up loss history data, which has to be submitted a lot of times with insurance applications. So you can see maybe how many times that house is flooded in the past, so you know what the loss history looks like. So those are just some of the things, but definitely work with your insurance professional and try to figure out what the history is, especially when you're buying a new property.
Yeah, we have the Flood Map Service Center also where folks can go and look up their risk. We have the FEMA flood insurance rate maps on there. Pinellas County has watershed management plans where we do more refined, detailed models of potential rainfall flooding in our watersheds, and those floodplains are available on that map service. The storm surge application developed by Emergency Management is fabulous. You can type in your address and it'll show you the depth of the storm surge associated with different category hurricanes. And you can take all of that information over to the National Flood Insurance Program website. They have a cost estimator tool. If you get, say, 3 inches of flooding in your home, what will the cost of that flooding be? So you can use these tools in tandem with each other as well. And I did, back to Hank was talking about the SBA, there's also a, HUD offers a competitive loan to finance mitigation of single family residences. It is section 203K insurance, and you can go to HUD.gov for more information on that one.
Great, thanks.
We also have, you know, the Know Your Zone application and our storm surge application as well too, where people want to see what the probability is of storm surge at their residence as well.
And
Great.
all of those are accessible at floodmaps.pinellascounty.org. That's floodmaps.pinellascounty.org.
Great, thank you. Lisa, if you can answer this, and if we need to, we'll pull in a municipal official. But if the claim exceeds the 50% rule to rebuild, what is the process?
So the claim and the substantial damage determination are separate pieces. The floodplain administrator will go out and do a substantial damage evaluation, and they will determine whether or not that structure is substantially damaged. The insurance is separate and apart from the floodplain management piece of it. Okay.
So if somebody, you know, either gets a determination by the city or the municipality or insurance, what do they do? Go you know, bid for a contractor, and how do they, you know, get the latest code? You know, how do they rebuild for that substantial improvement? What does that process look like?
So you need to work really closely with your building department. You need to talk to them about what the options are. You need to make sure that, you know, you'll get that letter from the municipality, and the municipality can't always get inside the home. So they're estimating that you have substantial damage. When you get your cost estimate to make the repairs and you bring it into the building department to get your permit, they'll take a look at that cost to repair the structure back to the condition it was in before it flooded, and they'll assess whether or not it truly is substantial damage. That whatever the value of your structure is on the property appraiser site. In some cases, people will have a private appraisal. No, it's not the same appraisal that you would get for a real estate transaction. It's a FEMA market value, which is literally the cost that it would be to rebuild the structure that you currently have, not a structure up to code, just to rebuild that exact structure as it was before the flood, depreciated down based on wear and tear or lack of maintenance. So the market value would need to be greater than 50% of the market value would need to be greater than whatever that cost to repair that building is. So I really recommend you work very closely with your building departments on these, because if you're right there at the edge, you know, they'll work with you to make sure that, you know, if it's not safe, it's got to come down and you've got to go up. And we had several of those. But in other cases, you know, the estimate isn't precise. You don't know that number until you get your estimate from your contractor.
Great.
And Lisa, just to be clear, you're saying the value of the building itself, the home itself, not the land. If you're worth it, it's worth $2 million because you have that pretty view. It's really what the house is on there is worth, right?
Absolutely. The pool doesn't count. The land itself doesn't count. You could build that building here or in Wyoming. The cost to build that building, granted, building costs will fluctuate a little bit, but you know, there's a national average that you can use to calculate what that market value is, and your building department will do that.
Okay, great. All right, well, you know, speaking of going up, there's a couple of questions about homes on stilts or elevating. I mean, what is meant by lifting your home? Is there emergency funds for that? One person looked into it, but can only find one company in our area that could do that work. So can you talk, you know, and what's freeboard? Can you talk about home elevation and funding it?
So the funding part of it, right now, we don't have the funding right now, the individual assistance or anything. So, you know, it's going to need to be financed by the homeowner. You know, if you've got substantial damage, you take what you get from your insurance policy payout, and then you'll have to finance the rest of it to rebuild, do your demo and rebuild. If you think that, you know, you can have a contractor look at, both your options. What's your option to repair and elevate versus to demo and build a new elevated house? I mean, the latter is probably going to be more affordable if you're that damaged, if the house is that damaged already. Obviously we can't recommend any companies to do the elevation, so you just need to search for those companies that do perform those. I know City of St. Petersburg has done several elevation projects through the FMA program, so maybe call their building department to ask them a few questions. I don't know if we have the City of St. Pete on this call to talk about that. But the funding, unfortunately, the funding is on the property owner. Like I said, we live in this area and it's beautiful, and there's a risk associated with the beaches and all the water recreation that we have. And we all need to be responsible and understand what that risk is and be prepared to mitigate after a flood.
Right. So Jess, I was going to call on you as someone who, formerly wrote flood insurance policies. Is it true that, the higher you go and elevate, the cheaper your flood insurance is?
I mean, there's a lot of variables that go into rating a flood policy, but the higher you are above base flood, the lower your rate will be. But something that I did want to bring up is NFIP, and this is kind of off topic, but I wanted to say it before I forget. NFIP, it's very important to understand the guidelines and the restrictions with the timeframes. So you have 60 days to submit a completed and notarized proof of loss to FEMA after to actually move forward with your flood claim. You really, safety first, always never enter a structure that does not have safe walls or has damage to the roof. You want to take as many after disaster photos as possible. There's no such thing as too many photos. Document everything, notify your agent immediately after a loss. A lot of times you'll hear contact the insurance company. It's my recommendation to contact your insurance agent first when you're talking about homeowners flood, anything along those lines, strictly because you may not be eligible for a claim, or you may not have enough damage to qualify for a claim, and that claim will stay on your loss history. And you don't want to have a claim that you never even got paid out for. Like we saw with Irma, a lot of the damage didn't even hit the hurricane deductible, which once the state declares tropical storm a hurricane, the hurricane deductibles enacted, and your policy is then subject to that hurricane deductible, which is typically a percentage versus a flat $5,000, $1,000. So call your insurance agent first and explain what's going on. They may document it, but it's not going to go on your loss history. And keep receipts for everything that you're doing. And keep in mind that adjusters are working with a lot of people at one time, especially when you have a lot of homes affected. So there's one of them and hundreds of you. So if you can't get in contact, keep calling, keep calling, keep calling. That way you know the status of your claim, and I hate to say it, but just keep making those phone calls to get the information that you need to stay within those guidelines of your timeframes.
Thanks, Jess. I'm going to make a comment, then Joe, I have a question for you. So regarding the claim process, you don't have to agree with what your adjuster provides you as an estimate. You can ask for a second adjuster. You can also call the company and ask for a desk adjuster and, talk to a supervisor. So just like any other life situation where you try to kind of get up the chain a little bit, you can do that. Make sure that you record or take notes on every conversation, and just keep comprehensive records, so you can protect yourself within that. And make sure that you empower yourself and make sure that your rights are upheld within this process. And so this is a service that you're paying for. you pay for insurance and you want to be made whole. So just make sure that you advocate for yourself and find assistance when you need it. Joe, we're still getting questions about assistance from FEMA. So, you know, are they coming? Are they not? Are we still going to try to go for a declaration to FEMA? You know, do we still need more data for justification? Can you paint that picture a little bit on where we are?
Right. So we're going to complete our submittal this week. I think we have enough information now, but I'll take any pictures that show flooding inside of homes, especially if it's higher than the electrical sockets as well too. We have our online tool that people can submit that to. So we hope to wrap that up, and then within a couple of weeks have a determination made, you know, from the state and FEMA about what type of assistance they're going to provide the Pinellas. There may, as Lisa was saying right now, the program to do some mitigation work is not available. It's going to be difficult because there was an emergency declaration. Usually if there's an emergency declaration, some mitigation funds become available post-storm, which I know is probably after the fact of some folks, you know, repairing their homes, but there might be some abilities to harden your homes with some of that funding if it comes available. We'll have to see about that down the road. I see some of the questions there that, you know, right now there is no housing assistance that's available if you have to be outside of your home right now. That's just not available. That's even hard to come by in a catastrophic event too. So I really feel for that situation because Lisa's right. If it's not safe to be in your home, you need to be out. But unfortunately, that's just not available. You know, we're hoping to get the, you know, the SBA to get the loan process to help you, you know, fund some of those repairs to your damages and things like that. And I know you mentioned the amounts that are available, but again, you know, it's going to be based on case management with the SBA and on what each individual situation is. Okay. So it's not like you can just go for 200,000 because that's what's available. They say it's based on some criteria that you'll have to submit to the SBA, but they're really great to work with and they'll provide you everything that they can if you choose to go that avenue, if it becomes available.
I think
Okay.
it's important to mention that, and Joe started to touch on this earlier, but through SBA, there is going to be a requirement for you to carry flood insurance if you are in a high-risk flood area for 3 years after receiving that assistance. And I believe it's over 25,000, but we can check on that and send that information out with our resources. But that is something to keep in mind, that you will be required to secure flood insurance for the next 3 years in order to get that assistance.
Okay. Thank you for clarifying that. So a couple quick questions. We got what does the SPA stand for? It's SBA as in boy, and that's the Small Business Administration. It's a governmental entity. We got asked a question if it's, you know, if we recommend getting a public adjuster with the NFIP. That is not such a thing. Public adjusters are private contracted adjusters by you. So you're hiring an adjuster for your case. They're not with the National Flood Insurance Program. And they will, you know, take a cut of your claim and potentially have assignment of benefits. That's something that we didn't really get into, but you want to make sure that you protect yourself, whether it's with a contractor or a lawyer or a public adjuster, that you watch closely for an assignment of benefits. And that basically means that your benefits are assigned to them. And typically that's monetarily, you know, and so you can end up losing out on money that comes to you. And so just look for any guidance for that. We have some with our Consumer Protection Office, and we're going to be providing that in some of the resources that we have. So one thing that we got asked, if a claim exceeds the 50% rule to rebuild and total demo is required, will the insurance pay the full value of the policy or $250,000? So
why don't we pull Ashley? Let's pull Ashley in on this one.
Okay. Ashley, will you come on and introduce yourself and talk a little bit about that? You have to take yourself off video.
Hi. So, okay, I kind of got lost in your question because I heard you talking about SBA loans and from there.
No problem. So, if a claim exceeds the 50% rule to rebuild, then total demo is required. So they're either substantially damaged according to the city, or the insurance company has them above 50%. But demo is required, and they must substantially rebuild. Will the insurance pay full value of the policy? In this case, it might be $250,000. So 250,000. So if you could just introduce yourself and help with that question a little bit.
All right. So, hi, I'm Ashley Tharp. I one of the flood advocates for Pinellas County. I have about 25 years of flood insurance experience, specifically flood insurance. So thank you for having me, by the way. So generally, to comply with the flood insurance and the claims process, they do have to have all of the documentation to support everything that's going into it. So the replacement costs, the value of the replacement costs. So if you're insuring a home for $250,000, but the replacement cost shows that it's actually only eligible for like 100,000, you're not going to get more than the actual replacement cost of the actual building. So, and then there's other factors that could come into it. So essentially the insurance company has to justify whatever their payments are. And so you would just need to supply whatever documentation that would go into it. In addition, sometimes the insurance company, if you are coming close to a policy limit, they want to withhold about $30,000, which is for ICC, which can be used to do those extra things that are needed to elevate your home and things like that. So essentially the recommendation would be work with the company, work with the adjusters to find out like what's going on and what is needed to documentation for the, to get everything covered.
Great, thanks. And I guess in general, if we're talking over $250,000 for a rebuild, and you hit the policy limit, what do we do? Do we, get a loan on top of that? Is that the, basically the recommendation?
That is a really good question. And, with flood insurance, through the NFIP, their limits are their limits. So you have your policy limits. And especially if you're insured to 250, you receive 250, there is no more money after that. There's no, within the NFIP. So talking to your agent beforehand about the flood insurance that you're purchasing, your home is valued. It's the most expensive thing that you're probably ever going to invest in. Please make sure you take care of it. So my recommendation is that you have adequate insurance. And that usually is in the form of excess flood insurance or some other type of insurance that will cover that. Unfortunately, it's just not there through the NFIP for a single family or for the amounts.
So we can do, 250 with the NFIP and then go above that with excess or surplus?
Yes, you would talk to your agent about the options available to you, and the costs associated with that do vary based on different companies. But there is options available for excess or surplus, or there's umbrella packages available. So, but it's not through the NFIP, it's through your independent agent, and it's usually a separate policy.
Great. Okay. Thank you, Ashley. So
I have one question for Ashley. Ashley, just to simplify and put it in one simple statement, if the insurance adjuster did not report that the claims exceeded 50% of the value of the structure, but the floodplain administrator did say that they were substantially damaged, structure is not safe, it needs to come down, and they submit that substantial damage letter to the insurance company will take that letter and pay out the replacement cost as long as the replacement cost is under 250.
They will review it further, and they just have to have their documentation of what they're paying out for. So obviously, if they didn't think it was a total loss, if they received documentation or information that it is a total loss, they do have to take that into consideration for the claim review. And so, yes.
Great.
Okay, so substantial damage determination gets provided to the insurance provider, and at that point, the insurance provider, if they agree with that analysis, they will provide the full limit of the policy for the replacement cost that it's taken out for.
Yeah.
Assuming it's under 250. If it was say 200, they'd get the 200, and then they would be eligible for the additional 30, up to the additional 30, because it still falls under 250.
Yeah, the maximum payout total for any single family or 2 to 4 family is 250. So once you reach that, it's over. But as long as, and then for commercial would be like 500. And
Great. All right. Thank you. I'm doing a time check real quick. So we're at 7:03. We're supposed to go to 7, but we're going to, stay here to answer some questions, and we appreciate everyone hanging on. Lisa, I've got 2 questions for you, and then Anna Marie, I'm going to kick it over for you for some tips that you can provide. So Lisa, there's a question about the NFIP loss avoidance clause that provides up to $1,000 in reimbursement costs taken to prepare for a storm. Is there a limit to that? And then can you provide an update on the state revolving, I guess maybe loan fund for mitigation? Was the question?
2 totally separate questions.
Yeah.
Let's start with the loss avoidance. So if you took preparations, you bought some of those products online that you find that are to stop the flooding from happening, or if you were proactive and you moved some of your things to higher ground to store them, off site so that they wouldn't be flooded. All of those preventative actions that you take, you can submit those receipts as long as those receipts are dated prior to the flood. It's not going to cover safe storage after the fact. So this is, you put up, I don't want to use a brand name, but you put up these flood barriers of some sort that you purchased. You can submit the receipts for those flood barriers to your insurance agent, and that's a separate piece of the policy. It's $1,000 called loss avoidance. So you can get reimbursed for all those products that you bought to try to prevent the flooding. Even if the flooding occurred, you tried to prevent that flooding, and you can get reimbursed for some of those products. You can also get reimbursed for labor, for sandbags and things like that. So talk to your insurance agent about exactly what's covered, and make sure you get your receipts in order and get those submitted as soon as possible now, because we're already a month out from this event. Second question, what was the second question?
The state mitigation revolving fund, is there
okay.
one?
So no, there's not one yet, but Charlie Chris and Roger Williams put through some legislation. It's HR 1610, and it's titled the State Flood Mitigation Revolving Fund Act of 2019. So that was submitted in 2019. We're in lame duck session now. I haven't checked up on it to see exactly where it is. But that legislation would basically provide a tool for states to provide low interest loans and funding for homeowners, businesses, not-for-profits, municipalities to complete mitigation projects to reduce their flood risk. So it's another avenue for funding for mitigation if the legislation were to pass. So I encourage everybody to write to your legislators and let them know that, we need mitigation funding so that we can get you guys up off the ground. We need this funding to help mitigate against flooding, get these older homes up off the ground. A lot of Pinellas County was built before we had flood maps. So a lot of us are on the ground, and we need to get up, and some of us need some help to do that.
Okay, thanks. All right, and a quick follow-up, Lisa, if the loss avoidance, what if there was no claim paid for an actual flood? Does the deductible apply to those expenses? Do you know?
As long as the flood was imminent. So as long as that flood was absolutely going to happen, you should be able to be reimbursed for it, yes. Okay,
great. All right. Anna Marie, can you give us a couple of tips on working with contractors, avoiding fraud? I believe you all have there's a licensing website that people can go to look up contractors. Can you introduce yourself and provide a couple tips for the attendees?
Sure. Thank you, Hank. So my name's Anna Marie Millette. I'm an investigator with Pinellas County Consumer Protection. And the best advice that I can give the participants that are in this situation, I'm hearing the common theme of damage to the home. So after any storm, I often see that people want to go back to normal as quickly as possible, and that includes fixing up their home, making the repairs. Please be very cautious of unlicensed contractors or individuals that just show up unannounced to your home offering to do the work. Majority of the time they're unlicensed, they're not trained properly to do the work, and they may either take money and not do what's promised, or they may do more damage than repairs. So as far as licensing, there's the Pinellas County Construction Licensing Board. You can go to pcclb.com, check to see that they're registered with Pinellas County, and to see what type of licensing. In Pinellas County, certain licenses for certain work are going to be required, and that includes insurance. So not only are they licensed, but they are insured as well when they're registered with them. Another thing to be careful about, if you do hire somebody and they're insisting you as the homeowner pull the permit, or that it'll be cheaper or quicker, that's a red flag that they cannot pull the permit themselves. Keep in mind, when you hire somebody to do a job, that is their role, is to do the job from A to B or A to Z, and that includes pulling permits. So whenever there's something outside of that scope, question it and be very cautious. But again, make sure that the individual is licensed, that they're insured. If someone is unlicensed or uninsured and they come to your home and they get hurt or cause damage, you as a homeowner could be responsible. You're dealing with so much already, you don't need additional complications. If you want to see if there's any complaints against a particular business, you can go to our website at Pinellas County Consumer Protection, and you can find out if we received any complaints, how many, and how they were handled, whether it was civil or criminal case.
Great. Thank you so much, Anna Marie. That was great. And just so everyone knows, links are going to be provided in resources after this in the follow-up email. We got a question on the average claim that was paid out. According to the latest data from FEMA, we're looking about $32,000, but not, those are 10% of the closed claims of the total that have been submitted to the NFIP. Joe, do you know what the official storm surge height was?
Lisa, do you recall? I think it was 5 to 7 feet from the National Weather Service.
Okay. All right. Yeah, and it hit the areas differently, whether we're talking about intercoastal on the Gulf side or the Bay side too, right? And that had to do with the direction of the storm and the wind, correct?
Unfortunately, it was the perfect storm. It came at the high tide with the right southeast winds and at the right angle to make higher than the high tides that we thought we were going to get. Yes, and it came closer to us than we thought as well too, from the track that we forecasted, that was forecasted.
Okay, great. It's good to know. All right. I'm gonna I think I'm gonna close with this, unless my invisible assistant Mary chats me anything else. And Mary's with emergency management, and she's doing a phenomenal job making sure that we have the resources and contacts and groups to assist everyone. I want to talk about mitigation. So, we've heard a couple comments about, my streets always flood when it rains. What is elevation or lifting? That there's, my local government talks about, installing different, storm valves and drains, and, and they have work orders and see, click, fix, and there's a bunch of that. So, we started off recognizing the risk to flooding in different types in our area, whether it's storm surge, tide, and rain are the main ones. We are working on our capital infrastructure at the local governmental level, through drainage, stormwater, different types of flood surge barriers like living shorelines, or what we call green and gray infrastructure. It could be a seawall. So we're actively looking at mitigation options when we address risk. We do that to current standards and current day risks as well as future ones. We're conducting a critical infrastructure vulnerability assessment that's going to look at what our tidal and storm surge impacts will be in 2100, so that when we design a building or a bridge, we can look at the lifespan of that infrastructure and then know the flood risk according to that and implement good design features. The same goes for homes. So when you build a home or when you rebuild, you want to look at the lifespan of that home, the risks associated, and forecast those risks. So, if you know that your area got flooded with 5 feet, now, just during the tropical storm, you're definitely going to want to elevate it above that threshold and above BFE. And there's benefits to that, including reduced, flood insurance, peace of mind, things like that. There's simple fixes too, or conveniences, if you will, or utility of elevating. So, you may have to elevate a home to 7 feet according to regulation, but if you do it to 10, you could park your car under it, right? So there's things, just additional conveniences that you can look at. So we're actively doing that, looking at mitigation for the future to enable a more resilient community. We see Eta as an opportunity to assess risk and to practice mitigation standards moving forward, and then working with the different municipalities to help inform infrastructure. So any of our panelists, I don't know if you want to add anything else on, making sure that you mitigate to your risk and to what we know, what you experienced, as well as for the future. Just any parting thoughts regarding mitigation?
I think we just be careful what, so flooding barriers work. They work for lower events, but they don't work for storm surge. So we just want to be careful with that messaging for that. They may have worked for this event, but when the water starts to get up, above ground level where your elevation is, 4 or 5 feet, it's going to come in through the windows and other places in your home. So the best bet is elevation, which is expensive. But, I do recommend some type of barriers for these low level events. They do seem to have some good impacts to protect your homes. Doesn't mean water won't seep in and get in there, but at least you might not have the, inches of water in your home compared to maybe just some seeping.
And if that does happen, can you install flood resistant materials inside the home? Is that a mitigation feature that you can have?
Well, so you can, but when the home gets soaked, behind those materials, the studs and everything else, it permeates. It's unfortunate mess, right? It needs to be dried out. It needs to be cut out and aired out.
Okay.
It's the best practice that we have now, other than, the elevating is the ultimate, right? So you're up and out of the water completely. And if you have damages where you're elevated down below, and I saw a question about that, you're not supposed to have anything below that elevation. So,
okay.
I do want to mention that a lot of restoration companies, especially during blue skies, these businesses and these companies want to partner with you. They want your business. So they will come out and do an assessment of your home, how many air movers you would need, what it would look like if your house was flooded or hit by a storm. And then you can be on their preferred client list. So a lot of associations did this before Irma. It's absolutely no charge because once the storm hits and everybody needs a new roof, it's hard to get a roofer on the phone. If you're on this preferred list, which basically they'll come in and do an assessment of your house or your condo or association, and then you're not contractually obligated to work with them, but we had companies that were on site the very next day at some of our associations to assess damage and bring in some of those air movers and dryers to mitigate against further loss. Because as the insurance policy holder, it's a one-way contract with the requirement for you to mitigate against further damage. Like Lisa was speaking about moving stuff out of the house. It's always recommended to try to get everything up as high as you can But you know, when you've got feet of water, it's just not something you're going to be able to do. But look into those restoration companies and contractors. And if you're unsure about the insurance, have your insurance agent check their certificate of insurance. Ask them for a certificate of insurance. Your insurance agent can look into that, because unfortunately we saw some fake certificate of insurance during the aftermath of Irma. So another way to check that out.
Hank, may I just add one
Yep.
additional thing?
Yes.
Is I caution the participants and viewers, be careful with assignment of benefits. That's a form that you sign. It's often within all the paperwork that you're signing. And I understand, you know, sometimes there's urgency to get the work done or get someone in there to dry things out. But you're basically giving that third party, usually the contractor, the right to deal directly with your insurance company. The issues that we see in our department is that if there is a problem with the work or with the contractor, the insurance company typically is not going to get involved. Since you've signed it where they can deal directly with your insurance company, payments are going directly to the contractor. So there's very little as far as resolution when a problem does occur, if it should. So we advise homeowners to deal directly with their insurance companies, know exactly if they're going to pay for the work, what amount that is, and you do not need to share that with anybody. So if the contractor comes out and says, well, how much is the insurance company paying? You don't have to divulge that information, because usually the contract's going to be somewhere close to that amount, if not over that amount. So work directly with your insurance company. I know sometimes it can be challenging, but I think it's always in the best interest of the homeowner. And then if there is an issue, you have the payments either coming to you or it's a third party payment where you have some leverage to work with as far as resolving any issues. So thank you.
Great. Thank you for further explaining that. And Lisa, I'm going to give you the last word here on mitigation with this question that we got. So maybe piggyback on what I mentioned and then respond to this. So homeowner got flooded. What if they dry their home out, replace the carpet, repaint the walls? What's the danger in that?
So in some cases, there's not. If you got all of the wet things out, you cut the drywall out, you removed that insulation, you removed any particle board cabinets, you got that stuff out quickly, and you got those dryers in, the dehumidifiers in there right after the flood, there's a good chance that you'll be able to salvage a lot of things. And you'll be well under that 50% threshold. There were not a ton of folks that were substantially damaged from this flood. For the most part, you know, we were seeing slab on grade with a half a foot of water. And those folks that got that drywall out and got their carpet out immediately and got the dryers going, they'll be fine. And they'll be able to, you know, build back. And when they do build back, you know, somebody asked about floodproofing materials. Like Joe said, that water's going to seep in behind that and it's going to need to come out anyhow. But what you can do is elevate your power outlets. And if your AC got wet, you could elevate that when you replace it. So there are some small things you can do that'll help protect you from more small events like this. But, you know, if a 100-year storm comes rolling in, you know, you're going to see a lot more damage. So I would say those of you that were impacted by this, those of you that are rebuilding, those of you that are relocating because of this storm, please use the Flood Map Service Center and assess your risk. Look at the different category hurricanes, look at how deep the water could get wherever it is that you are. Look at the flood maps from FEMA and the county and see how deep that water could be. Use that flood assessment tool that floodsmart.gov has. You can put in how much water and how much damage you can expect, and then make a plan. And I don't mean just have your go bag ready for an evacuation. I mean, have your finances in order to recover after a flood as well. Make sure you have your insurance policy up to date. Make sure that you have all the coverage that you need. Be safe out there.
That's well said, Lisa. You know, I hate to put it this way, but see this as a training opportunity for the future and for the big one. We live on the coast and we love the coast, but we've seen how active a hurricane season this was in the past few years. You know, and we did, you know, we've missed the big one for a while. I think we haven't had a direct landfall from a hurricane since 1921. I think Joe's nodding his head, right? So, learn from this, adapt, for the question about the carpet, maybe look into tile, next time, or, see if you can afford that. So you're not ripping out carpet again. Look into flood resistant materials. Do what you can and be ready for next time. Reevaluate your insurance policies. Make sure you speak with your insurance agent once the dust settles. If you're not happy with the answers, go talk to someone else. Go shop it if you can. We really appreciate everyone's attendance, and especially for those of you who've stuck around until this late in the night. We want to make sure that we're providing the best information and resources to everybody. In this situation, it's different than other, storms in that, that we don't have the declaration, and we're figuring it out, as we go. There will be following up after this webinar with an email with resources, including PDF documents, links to websites that we mentioned, phone numbers, a list of contact information for the panelists who you heard from and ones who you didn't hear from, who are on standby in case a question came up for them. If there's attendees can call Red Cross that has caseworkers. I just got a note, so 1-800 Red Cross to see if they can provide any assistance as well. And of course, as mentioned earlier, you can email ema@pinellascounty.org. We really appreciate everyone's attendance tonight, and we hope that you learned something valuable from tonight's webinar, and we hope to host more of these in the future and receive your time and attention then, as well as, we unfortunately have to prep for next hurricane season. So did I miss anything from any of the panelists? Any last words?
Nope. Know your risk, have a plan, and stay informed.
There you go. All right. Well, thank you, everyone, and have a very good night and a very happy holiday season.